Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Student Paramedic podcast.
Welcome back to the Student Paramedic podcast. My name is Brayden and I'm joined here today by Alex.
Hey guys, and I'm joined by Imogen.
Hi everyone.
And today we're sitting down with Lisa Westgate. Now Lisa was a paramedic for over 10 years and found herself going through her own mental health journey. So we're going to have a chat about that today, as now on the other side of that she does a lot of talks to the Victorian police recruits. And so we're going to have a chat today about looking after your own well-being and starting that, quite early on in the career as a student. So, Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. As you guys said, my name's Lisa Westgate. I was an ambulance paramedic from 2005 to 2016 or so on the books. And my career ended due to mental health diagnosis. That was PTSD, anxiety, and depression. I went on a bit of a 18-month recovery journey, and since the end of 2015 have been symptom medication free and have been working, as you said, Brayden, with all sorts of groups, be them emergency services or just individuals, about PTSD and trauma recovery. And also I have a very strong passion around prevention and preparation. So I think that there's a lot that can be done before seeing the terrible things which are inevitable in these sorts of roles.
That's really true, because we were having a chat to you before and you were saying that, all of a sudden, you'd been diagnosed with, PTSD, depression and anxiety. Had that just crept up on you, or did you notice that prior? Was it just something that just came out of the blue?
Yeah, awesome question. For me, I sort of liken it to Dorothy spinning around in the tornado, right? So one of the things that you typically don't have when you're dealing with mental health concerns is insight into your own mental health. That old adage of like, crazy people don't know they're crazy. So, it's like Dorothy spinning around in a tornado and she's like, gee, it's real windy today. Like you really don't understand the extent of it potentially. And that was certainly the case for me. So what I did know was that I was really angry all the time at everything and everyone constantly. And I was exhausted. And that was pretty much it. And I just swung between that real low energy exhaustion, and anger was the only state of high energy I could get. So if you think about anger, like you can't be angry and tired, right? So angry is like an energizing emotion. When you're angry, you're quite heightened and your heart rate's fast and all that sort of stuff. And so when you can't access things like excited or motivated, anger is like the only sort of, high energy emotion that I had access to. So I was really holding on to it because there was value in that. When I was angry, I could get shit done. As anyone, you've probably like angry cleaned your house at some point, like you just become productive in that state. And then the total other swing of the pendulum was that I was just exhausted and wanted to spend all day in bed and didn't really want to do anything. So I knew those two things, but I didn't really know that I had a mental health concern. I think I was probably, in hindsight, I look back, I think I was probably at work for about 18 months longer than I should have been anyway. And looking back, there were signs, but I didn't know. But when I talk about being the last one to my own PTSD party, I came out of the closet and I was like, I think I might have a mental health issue. And everyone around me, my friends and family, were like, no shit. Like, yeah, you've been horrible to live with for like 2 years. So from their point of view, from outside looking in, it was obvious to them that things were not right and things had changed and I was not well and, not coping. But in it, I had very little insight. I just knew that I had to get up and go to work every day because, like, you can't go to work just because you don't feel like it. That's not an option, right? And at the time, I was the breadwinner for our family, so I was bringing in most of the money. And at the time, I've got a husband and 3 kids, so I can't just not turn up because I'm tired or don't want to deal with morons that call me for a stub toe. I got to get up and go put my uniform on and go to work. So it's real one step after the other kind of thing.
That's interesting. So very cumulative, and I guess we're in a job, or we're going into a job where we're going to be going to confronting cases and doing all these things. And, it can take over time, I guess, like that cumulative effect of like, no, I'm fine. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, I'm not fine.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't even really have that realization. I didn't know that the posters on the back of the toilet door about mental health, like, I didn't know they were for me. I didn't connect the dots. I just knew I was angry because everybody I spoke to was an idiot. And I was really tired and I wasn't sleeping well. So I think it's really important to know that, so that you can take that into looking out for your colleagues and looking out for each other, because you'll notice a change in behavior or an issue with somebody else probably before they'll notice it within themselves. I think it's almost always a diagnosis of mental health label or burnout or compassion fatigue or whatever you want to label it, overwhelm. I think it's almost always cumulative. And when I started unpacking my health issues, I came to realize that my 2.5 years in the non-emergency sector of ambulance was absolutely a contributing factor to where I ended up sort of, 12 years later. Because you're going in and out of nursing homes every day. You're really confronted with mortality. So I don't think mental health issues and poor mental health and things like PTSD are uniquely reserved for emergency ambulance work. Like, yes, you do see terrible things. Yes, you will see human beings do awful things to each other. Yes, you will go to car accidents. Yes, you will go to, violence and trauma and all that sort of stuff. And that's kind of what you're signing up for. What you don't know you're signing up for is being confronted with your own mortality on a daily basis. So most people don't really think about the fact that their existence is finite until you have a family member pass away, so Nana passes or something, and you're like, oh my God, yeah, at some point we're all going to die, right? So most people get about sort of having this sense of there's time. I've got time, I'm going to live till I'm like, 90 odd, right? But when you do a role where you're going in and out of nursing homes, your perception gets a bit warped. If you're entering a career where you're going to spend the next 5, 10, 15 years with the sick, the dying and the dead, you kind of get an altered perspective about the world, right? And that takes a toll. And I've not really heard anybody else talking about that. And so in and out of nursing home, back and forth to dialysis, all those non-emerge, like, oh, but it's only non-emerge. Like, the expectation is it's not very taxing, but it absolutely has an influence on how you start seeing the world and how you start considering your own existence and the people around you. And you start thinking, wow, well, this person that I share my life with, they could also drop dead at any minute, and those thoughts start occurring. So it's not exclusive to, the big dramatic jobs, the suicides and all that stuff does happen and you will go to it, but it's not necessarily only those jobs that take an emotional toll. It's a lot of those little things. So sometimes it's a bit like, death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, it's definitely is that emerging factor. Like, it's definitely accumulates over time. And as you said, those posters on the back of the toilet walls, you didn't think they're for you. And I think that's a really common thoughts and feeling process of a lot of emergency workers when you experience patients who, they have mental health problems, and you don't think that you can get affected, but really you're in the epicenter of it, and you get the ricochet, you get the crossfire between trying to help people and then coming back towards you. And as you said as well, like, this before we jumped on, we're having a small chat, how you'd have some days you'd feel so down and you didn't want to go to work, but you still had to go to work and put your best foot forward because you're going to people in their emergencies. How has that then transpired across to what you do now, and you're working with people who, before they're going into work and also after they've experienced those events in their life, how does your experience then cross into how you then talk to people and mentor them?
Cool. So I now, well, for the last 5 years, I've worked in sort of the space of PTSD and trauma recovery. So people, the typical phone call that I used to get, and I haven't got it for a while, it was a seasoned paramedic or police officer would call me and say, I think I've got a problem. And I go, okay, what's going on? And they go, well, my wife's just taken the kids to her mum's house, and she said she's not coming back until I get myself sorted. And that is that real crisis point when it's been taken out of their hands, it's affected their family. Like, that's very late in the game. And I would so much rather have conversations. I'm like, great, well, you should call me 6 months ago, before. So this didn't happen. And I have a process where I modeled on my own process of recovery that I take people through and help them recover from whether they have I don't need to work with somebody with a diagnosis. Like, they don't need to have a diagnosis in inverted commas from a psychologist or something. I'll just work with people who are, not coping, or they're stressed, or they're not sleeping, or, I don't, it's not a requirement for them to have the label, so to speak. I think what's unique in what I can offer is that I've lived it. So I've lived the uniform, I've done the work, I've had the organizational stress, but I've also lived mental illness, and then I've lived the recovery. So when people talk about lived experience, there's stages of that. Whereas, as much as, like I was saying to you guys before, like, if people haven't caught up with it, definitely go back and listen to the interview with Hodgie. He was talking about EAP, and, there's the smart services down here, so that, whatever service you go into, there are access points for mental health. All of those are after the fact. So once there is already a problem, and there's obstacles to that. People are apprehensive to go and seek out help from within their service because maybe it'll go to a manager, or maybe, so there's people have, very justifiable concerns about what the effects of that are going to be on their career and those sorts of things. And that might stop them from, accessing those resources. So what I wanted to do when I recovered and when I got well and I knew that there was another way out, was to let people know that there's options and there's choice. And there's a whole lot of people that can help external to the service, whatever service you happen to be in, whether it's, AV or VicPol or Queensland Ambulance, whatever it is. There's a whole lot of people external to that work in this space, and you can access them without referrals, without having to go through a work cover or any sort of claim process. You can just ring them up. And I think it's important for people to know that they've got options when it comes to seeking support.
We were talking before about how a lot of other people were recognizing that you weren't coping and you were sort of the last person to know. And such a large part of this job is giving so much of yourself to other people. And so I wanted to ask you how you sort of change and flip your mindset to prioritize taking care of yourself when you want to give the best care to other people, and you can't do that when you're not in a good state. So I just wanted to ask you how you take care of yourself best and what advice you would give to us to prepare ourselves prior to the fact to make us the best professionals that we can be?
Yeah, awesome question. I love that you want to know that ahead of time, especially. I think there's a couple of really key concepts. First of all, it's really important to understand the difference between empathy and sympathy and compassion. So empathy is what I thought I needed to be a good paramedic. I thought that was part of my job. And empathy is basically you go to somebody in their time of crisis. So let's say metaphorically, they're knee deep in shit, right? That's when they call, 000 is when things have gone to it. So empathy is joining them in their problem. Empathy is being with them in their problem. All right. And I thought that's what I had to do, was really to be in there with them and support them through it, right? Empathy also means that you're there with them, right? So you're taking part of what's going on for them on, and you're taking it into you. Sympathy, and even better, compassion, is about being very clear about this is their issue. This is their problem. This is their crisis. You're coming in, but it's not your stuff. And really being clear about this imaginary wall between you and them, and understanding what is your stuff, what is their stuff. And by separating yourself from their situation, it actually allows you to help better, because you can be there 100% with them in their issue, right? Whatever their problem or crisis is that they've called us for, and not have to manage your own emotional response to their crisis. I'll give you an example. You will no doubt in your careers go to many cardiac arrests, right? We used to get told it's your bread and butter job, right? I don't know if they still say that, but the old blokes used to say it's your bread and butter, right? So going to a cardiac arrest is really standard as a paramedic. It's not standard for the person who's witnessed their loved one have a cardiac arrest, right? The family member. It's not standard for them. They haven't done 3 of those this week. This is the worst day of their life. And so being able to be present in compassion for them and understand that they are having an awful day, but it's not your stuff. So you don't have to even, it will happen. Like there's going to be stuff where you go, oh my God, but they kind of look like my uncle, or, there will be some, they're like, my parents have the same pattern on their couch. There'll be some little trigger that makes you feel connected to the situation that's going on with somebody else, but understanding that it's not your family member. You have no ownership over their grief or their stress or their sadness or whatever they're going through, right? It's not yours to take on. And so by not taking it on because it's not yours, one, you're helping yourself, because you're not going to go around like I did for 10 years and collect other people's grief and sadness and store it in your body and end up sick. But also, two, it allows you to be the compassionate ambo that they need to be present with them in their stuff, because you can be there for them, not having to worry about your own emotional response, because that's really exhausting. To have your own response to somebody else's problem, that will absolutely wear you down. So understanding you actually don't need to be empathetic to be a good ambo. You can be compassionate, which means visit over the other side of the wall in their stuff and then come back to your side, but be clear about what's yours and what's theirs. The other concept that I wanted to share is one that I share with Victoria Police recruits, as Braden was saying. So fortnightly, I get to speak to them, which is such a privilege. And one of the things I talk to them about is understanding the difference between your role and your identity. And so your role is what you do for however many hours a week you put that uniform on. And your identity is who you are. So one is what you do, the other is who you are. And your identity is huge, right? It's your beliefs, your values, it's what's important to you, it's what you like doing, what are your hobbies, cooking, cleaning, you guys are in Queensland, probably like swimming and surfing and beach activities, right? So being with your friends, playing games online, all those things, and how you relate to all your family members and your friends, all of that makes up your identity, and your role is like a tiny drop in that bucket. What you do for a job, right? That contributes to your identity, but they're not the same thing. So I think lots of us, maybe it's a generational issue, lots of us in uniformed roles and helping roles, like doctors and nurses as well, and teachers too, we equate the two, right? Our role becomes our identity. I'm an AMBO, I'm a cop. So the issue with that is when the role is lost due to you've got to move interstate, there's a family emergency, you've buggered your shoulder, right? For whatever reason, you can't do that job anymore. If you've attached it to your identity, then when you lose that, you lose who you are. And that will precipitate a mental health crisis. When you lose your identity because you've lost your role, that's going to cause major issues. So understanding that who your role and your identity are interrelated, but they're not the same thing, gives you that distance so that if anything does happen, you do have to have some time off. You do have to take a break. You do have to take some extended leave. You've got to go see a psychologist, whatever it is, and you've got to park that role for a little while. It doesn't crush who you are in your being because you haven't equated it to your identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's a point that's been brought up actually by quite a few people in terms of not making the profession your identity and having something external, whether that be, different hobbies and things like that, so that if something does happen and your identity is challenged, you're able to fall back on something else and, it doesn't feel like your whole identity's just been crushed.
Yeah, absolutely. So keep all those other aspects, and, shift work and the work that you guys are jumping into can really easily become all consuming, because all of a sudden you're doing crazy shift work and you can't commit to like a regular Thursday night Pilates, because you're like, oh, well, some Thursdays I can't come because I've got a night shift, right? So moving into a shift work lifestyle also sort of messes with your activities and your friendship groups. So you've got to be really deliberate about keeping those things alive and feeding them and making the time for them, and also being 100% present in those other activities when you're doing them. So when you're not at work, switch off your work brain. And the way to do that is to switch on your play or your time with family or your, whatever those other things are. And the more you can immerse yourself in those other activities and be really present in them, that's going to allow your work brain to switch off when you're not there. So when you do come back to work, you can switch it on. But if you don't switch off, you can't switch on, right? You got nowhere to go.
That's really interesting and a really good way to put it.
Yeah, that's a really good point there that you mentioned, Lisa. When you, for example, if you're a banker, you don't come home and you're still a banker. You work 9 to 5 and you're a banker. If you're a medical professional, you're expected to be a medical professional your whole life, 24/7. If you're in an emergency in a shopping center on a plane, they always go, is there a doctor? Is there a nurse? Is there a paramedic? And you're expected to put your hand up. No one comes out. Is there a banker here?
Yeah, so quick, we need an accountant for small business.
Literally, yeah. It's like, no, I've just been taxed. Can someone help me quickly? It's an emergency. It's such an important factor that you mentioned that, leaving it at the door and just kind of not bringing it into your personal life and setting, having a different personality and having a different life outside, or having the same life, but having it outside the job. And I think that really correlates so much into not having that groundwork set in an important, like from an early time in your career. I think the average, like national average, is about 7 years in the job now, with some services being like just over 4 years in job, just because a lot of new recruits and new graduates think that this is their job, this is what they are doing, and they get so fixated on the one factor of that. If you could give, like 3 pieces of advice to students, paramedics, to then come into the job to learn these things and foster these skills prior to working on road, what would those 3 bits of advice be?
So the first would be that role versus identity, and understand the difference and have it clear in your mind, the difference between what you do and who you are. The second would be the way to sort of enforce that concept is an idea. I thought I made it up, but apparently there's a book about it, which I was a little disappointed to hear, is this concept of the third space. So you have your workspace, wherever you turn up to work or study, if you're still in study. And then you've got your home space, which is where you put your head down at night, right? So you've got your workspace and your workspace and your home space. I encourage the new recruits, the people coming into these roles that I speak to create a third space. And if you think of that as a buffer between the two, you're creating a sort of download space so that rather than going from your workspace straight to your home space and metaphorically dragging in your emotional stuff on your boots over your doormat at the front of your house, and then bringing that into your home, whether it's with family or housemates or whatever it is, and just dragging that stuff in the door and be like, oh God, I had the worst day today when you got this stupid job we shouldn't have gone to, right? Create a third space which acts as a buffer. Now, this third space could be go for a walk on the beach. So you finish work, your shift, then you go to your third space and then you go home. So for example, could be a walk on the beach, could be going to a nearby reserve, taking your feet off, don't take your feet off, people. Take your shoes off and go for a walk in bare feet on the grass. So all those grounding type activities. It could be the drive home and cranking up the heavy metal or whatever you like listening to as loud as you can and pounding the steering wheel and screaming Metallica lyrics if that's your thing, right? That's how old I am. It's a Metallica reference. So whatever your thing is, if you're familiar with the breathing technique, so maybe you've done some martial arts or you've done some meditation practice, do that, right? But all of the point of the third physical space is to create a third mental space. So you're giving yourself time. So as much as, debriefing with your colleagues at the end of your shift still at work is a really great idea as well, if that's available. Then enter this third space and really allow yourself to process. Because as much as we want to be superhuman, right, we put that uniform on, and that's like our armor. We're like, nothing can get through this because I'm at work and I've got this uniform and that's my armor and I'm protected. The truth of the matter is we all wear civilian undies, right? What that means is, as well as having an operational response, right? So you've got your drills, you've got your systems, you've got your doctors ABCD, you've got your, scene management skills. You're going to run your processes when you're at work, but then you're also going to have a human response. And that might be anger at the way human beings treat each other. It might be feeling let down by your colleague because they didn't get you the stuff you asked for as quickly as you wanted it. It might be, sadness because you have gone to a fatality of some sort, right? So your human response, you need to make some time for that because you're allowed to be a human. All right. You can say, Lisa said, right, I'm not a robot. I'm allowed to be a human. And I think that was one of the things I didn't do for 10, 11 years on road was make time for that human response. So obviously we need to do what we need to do at the time. When we're on the job, we do what we need to do and we have our operational response, our systemized response. Then that third space is allowing yourself time to have a human response. So whether you're sitting at the beach or whether you're listening to music or wherever you are, it's okay to cry if you're upset because you saw something awful. You were involved in an awful job. It's okay to be angry because somebody did something mean to another human being and that conflicts with your moral values, right? And it makes you upset. It's okay to have those emotional human responses and deliberately allocate some time and space to have that and then go home. Right. And what a difference that's going to make when you give yourself space and time for that. And then you can go home And you can be all those other roles. You can be a housemate or a son or a daughter or a parent or, you know, whatever else you do when you're at home. And you can be that person because you've given yourself that space and time to have that buffer. Yep. And if you don't have a familiarity with the breathing technique, the third tip I would give you is very simply breathe out longer than you're breathing in. So while you're in that third space, when you're doing some decompression, also if you're heading out to a big job, and if you guys are just starting out and it's lights and sirens and they're talking about helicopters and it's a multi-car pile-up, right? And your adrenaline's pumping and you're like, I'm excited, but also holy shit, right? And you know that you've got to pull yourself back down to think clearly, right? Because you've got two sides of your brain. You've got your thinking brain or you've got your emotional brain, and only one side's going to work at one time. So you need to calm that emotion so that you can think clearly. Breathe out longer than you're breathing in. So even, I mean, there's all sorts of rhythms for that. You can do a 4, 8, 6, 7. So that's breathe in for the count of 4, breathe out for 8, hold your breath for 6, and then breathe out. So there's patterns, 4, 6. I always get the numbers wrong. But basically, physiologically, as long as you're breathing out for twice as long as you're breathing in. So even if you just breathe out for 8, breathe in for 4, within about 6 breaths, that's going to lower your blood pressure and your heart rate, which is and nobody knows you're doing it, right? Like it's super ninja. You can be driving to the job and just doing a couple of those sorts of breaths where you just like long exhale, normal breath in, long exhale, and your partner's not even going to know that you're doing secret ninja stuff. So when you get there, you're not in that heightened, like, what do you want me to do sort of state, and you can actually bring yourself down and get on with what you need to do and come across as really together, you know, and you'll be like, they don't know my top secret skills.
You did speak a lot about how a lot of those confronting jobs are obviously going to be inevitable, and you found that having an outside purpose or an outlet of some kind is really helpful to separate your work life with your personal life. But I also wanted to touch a little bit more on how the accumulation of seeing the little jobs and being confronted with mortality so frequently, how can you kind of notice those things early and come to terms with the fact that that is inevitable coming into this job?
Yeah, it's a good question, Imogen. It's a bit tricky. I think it's very individualized. You know, nobody deals with this stuff the same way. Everything that I am talking to you guys about is all the shit I didn't do. Right? So this is like lessons learned the hard way because I made all the mistakes and I went down that path and I ended up really crook, right? So I know that doesn't end up well if you don't do these things. There's lots of people I know in various services that seem to be doing well sort of 20, 30 years down the road. And I'm like, how, you know, they're doing pretty well in terms of their mental health and their career. And what I've noticed is that pattern that they have very full lives outside their job. So I've got a friend of mine who is also like a champion dog breeder and dog shower, as well as her ambulance career, right? So she's also a MICA paramedic, so really stressful job, but she also runs this business and that gives her such a different focus. So that's how I know that doing that and setting yourself up like that has value. How can you get used to the reality of mortality? That's a very existential kind of question for a podcast, Imogen.
Sorry.
I think I love it. I think everyone's different. I think there's a couple of things you can do, and it's going to sound real cheesy because we've all heard it 700 times, but really fostering a gratitude mindset really does make a difference. Because it is going to be very easy to see in your world as you enter these roles the negative and see the things that are upsetting in life and the way the world works. So training your brain to have a gratitude filter, training your brain to look for the silver linings. So if you get cut off in traffic, you can be like, wow, that was lucky, didn't even clip the front of my car, so I don't have to go to panel beater. Oh, now I'm stuck in traffic. Excellent. I get to hear the end of this fantastic student paramedic podcast I'm listening to, right? So training your brain to look for the silver linings, look for the positive, because 99% of the time there's something, and it could be like weak, but there's something that you can take from it that you go, well, actually, that's good because I learned this about myself or something, right? So just practicing that. Your brain is very good at doing what you tell it. So if you're constantly looking for the negative and for the miserable, you'll keep finding it. So if you can turn that superpower around and start looking for the plus sides, looking for the learning, and that's that beauty of reflection, Braden, that you were talking about, what did I do well? What can I do better? And turning that constructive criticism into, or that feedback of like, oh, that didn't go so good, into a learning opportunity is also gratitude. It's been grateful for the learning, right? So all of those habits actually alter the way that you view the world. The other thing that I think is beneficial for investigation is some sort of greater perspective. So for some people, that's going to be a connection with God. For some people, there's going to be a real spiritual element. I'm not into the big dude in the sky with a beard. I'm more into sort of quantum physics and the universe, and, everything happens for a reason and there's no coincidence and that sort of jazz, right? But when I look at the stars, or I go to the beach and I look out at the horizon and just the water, that for me reminds me that, I'm this big on a rock spinning around in space, and, my shit's really not that bad. Like, in the great scheme of universality, it's pretty small. And that helps me gain perspective of what feels like a big deal the further away I get from it. So whatever suits you in terms of how can I regain that greater perspective that this thing that feels all consuming isn't actually all consuming. And I think practicing those two things, that looking for the silver lining and remembering that there's a big, giant, wide world out there. And there's, it's not about minimizing your emotional state, but it's giving it context.
Well, we've got some really great insight from you. So things like the breathing, so exhaling longer than inhaling. We've had gratitude, making sure that we're not making the profession our identity, and also having a third space, well as love, obviously having, and thinking about our place in the universe, all these different things, and also just coming to terms with our own mortality. These are all really great things for mental health. If there's just one piece of advice for a student, what's the best one to set ourselves up for success for a good career with our mental health?
Well phrased. Yeah. So I talk about mitigating risk. So, it's about sort of lowering the likelihood rather than, I'm not going to say that you can prevent it entirely. The one thing, you're really putting me on the spot, Alex. One thing.
You've got lots of different ones in your toolkit, but just one that you use, I guess, the most often, or the one you tell people the most often?
I would say that mental health is a spectrum. So it's a continuum, right? From all the way from really poor to really good. And we all dance along that continuum daily, weekly, right? I can start off having a good morning and by the afternoon it's turned to shit, and vice versa, right? So it's a continuum. It's part of the human condition. It's part of a human experience. Being a person means that you're going to slide up and down that continuum. So understanding that this is an element of humanity, an element of your humanness, means that there's actually no requirement for stigma of others, stigma of self, right? Self-stigma is a big deal, right? So appreciate that you are wearing civilian undies under whatever uniform you wear, you are allowed to have a human experience. You're allowed to slide along this continuum of poor mental health to great mental health, right? Rock bottom to rocking. And therefore, there is no shame in having conversations around that continuum and having conversations where you need help or you're offering help, because it's just part of being a person. And I think the more we can understand that and give mental health that paradigm of humanity, you know, you have to eat food, you have to drink water, we all go to the toilet. These are the requirements of being a human being, right? So is sliding along that mental health continuum. It's just part of being a person. And if you give it that context, why would there ever be stigma?
That's a really good point.
Yeah, I really love that. That's actually a really great way of thinking about it, actually. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come have a chat to us and all of our student paramedic listeners. Hopefully, you know, we can start these conversations early on in the career and make it something that is easily talked about to hopefully help each other and you know, people coming into the profession, you know, 5-10 years down the line. So for our listeners, whereabouts can they find you?
Best place to find me is just lisawestgate.com. Next year, I'm going to be launching an ebook and a course specifically around all this stuff for people coming into these roles, to really solidify and have in one place all these resources for you guys and people that are in a similar position. So that's on the way. Like I said, it's been a big passion of mine for the last couple of years. So I'm consolidating all of that. But yeah, the website is the best place to, you can check out all my podcast listenings and YouTube and book a chat with me and all that sort of stuff.
Great. Sounds awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Student Paramedic Podcast. You can connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or you can email us at thestudentparamedicpodcast@gmail.com.